Good afternoon. I've been told to keep the train on time, and let me tell you, I don't want to get in trouble with Mr. De Lama. I would like to welcome you to our panel, Beyond Imagination and Connection and Community Through the Arts. I want to thank our wonderful panelists for joining us today, and I want to thank you for coming to see us. Self-expression, communication, collaborations are just a few of the very important skills supporting healthy, meaningful relationships. The arts allows us to share ideas, skills, experience in a way that cultivates lasting connections critical to building these relationships. In this panel, we want to talk about how to reach your community, your audience. How do you encourage self-expression? And let me start with this panel. Let me start by introducing our panelists. I'm going to go this way. So I'm going to start with Eisenhower Fellow from Ireland in 2004, Fiach MacConghail. Thank you. He was the director of the Abbey Theater, Ireland's national theater, for 12 years, from 2005 to 2016. He was also been involved in cultural policy and production for more than 2 years. Fiach served as a senator in the Irish Parliament between 2011 and 2016, and currently is the CEO of the Digital Hub in Dublin, the largest cluster of digital and technological companies in Ireland. Next is an Eisenhower Fellow from 2020, Shaza, Ishak. She guides strategy for the only ethnic minority theater in Singapore, where she serves as the executive director and artistic director. She serves the main minority populations are Malays with 14% of the population, Indians at 9%, and Eurasians and other with 2%. Under her leadership, her company brings to the center stage the issues of race, religion, sexual discrimination, and economic inequality. She sees this as globalizing local issues and localizing global issues in a country that is wealthy but ranks low on the protection of human rights. Next to me, and next we have Eisenhower USA Fellow Jane Golden. She is well-known, world-renowned, well-known. She is the executive director of the Philadelphia Mural Arts Program. She's also an adjunct professor at the University of Pennsylvania, teaching the history and the practice of the contemporary mural movement. Jane has also overseen the growth of Philadelphia's mural program from a small city agency to the nation's largest mural program and a model for community development around the globe. Under her direction, the program has created more than 3,800 landmark works of public art through innovative collaborations with community-based organizations, city agencies, schools, the private sector, philanthropies, and nonprofits, and including the one and only Eisenhower Fellowships mural of the late General Colin Powell. Sought after as an expert on her urban transformation through art, Golden has received numerous awards for her work, including 2016 Women of Influence Award from Pearl S. Buck International, the Philadelphia Award, a Distinguished Daughter of Pennsylvania Award from the former Governor Ed Rendell, and prestigious honors from Bryn Mawr College, Villanova, LaSalle Universities, and the Moore College of Art and Design, and among others. In her spare time, Golden serves as the Mayor's Cultural Advisory Council, the Penn Museum Advisory Committee, and the Board of Directors of the Helen Trope Foundation. So welcome.
Thank you.
Let me start with you. Given the horrible situation we're seeing in the Middle East today, can you tell us about your work to find common ground with the Palestinians and Israelis? And how did you decide to focus on that? And then how did you go about it?
Wow. Well, first of all, my formative years growing up in Ireland was going to the theatre. And we're lucky in Ireland that our self-definition and our growing awareness as a nation came about through a whole bunch of amazing artists who came together, and essentially it was a cultural revolution that, you know, became an uprising in 1916, and subsequent to that, artists continued to define the complexity of what it is in terms of identity and the complexity of politics. And W.B. Yeats, one of our Nobel Peace Prize, founded the theatre that I ran for 12 years. And so I began to understand that artists, poets, you name them, are the canary in the coal mine. They say things, sometimes inadvertently, sometimes in code, like the great Nobel Prize winner Seamus Heaney. Things are said, and you need to distill them. You need to hear them in a way that is not confrontational, that is context, but that is controversial. Because what art is, as I think we all hopefully agree, I think we do, is art is about truth. You know, you can't fake it, and if you do, it's not good art, right? It's propaganda. And I began to understand that, and began to kind of think about that a lot around those engagements, Carrie. And I was very privileged to be an Eisenhower Fellow in 2004, and referencing what Secretary Gates said this morning. I mean, the US were world beaters when it came to instrumentalizing art. Now, what I mean by that is they weren't, I suppose, using it as propaganda, but they were encouraging really innovative artists to travel abroad as a part of cultural diplomacy. So when on my visit to the, as a part of my fellowship, I visited the Pentagon, I saw the archive, I met people at the NEA, American for the Arts, and I understood the soft power. And actually at the time, Carrie, the American officials I met in the Pentagon were very disappointed that Ireland at the time didn't have an international soft culture diplomacy policy, which we have now, by the way, and my input into that was setting up a policy paper for the minister at the time that I worked for, and then became that. But anyway, so I shared the dismay this morning in this great nation, the US, in that they left behind the valuable power of that interconnection that artists can make, that connection artists can make. And that's what I learned. And when I ran the Abbey, and indeed post that, I invited Israeli artists, Palestinian artists, to come to Dublin, a safe space, but a space that they would also recognize as a place of revolution, of conflict, of confusing identity, of walls, of language differences, of nuance. And we've lived in Ireland, we've lived with that ambiguity a lot. We still do with the peace that we've won in the north, and particularly around the Good Friday Agreement. But it is an ambiguous peace, right? Some sectarianism has been institutionalized, and every day we have to develop that. So what I tried to achieve, and I brought for the first time Arabic language, which was controversial. I brought an Arabic theatre company, Golan Heights Druze company, to the Abbey, and people were uncomfortable about that. People perhaps who thought that I was pro-Palestinian or pro-Arab, but I wasn't. And the important thing of the work I brought over was that it was good art, right? So the discussion was about that, was about the art. Well, I'm not sure if I didn't like that. So it's about taste, aesthetics, storytelling, and it wasn't about, yeah, I don't believe that writer because that writer is using it as propaganda. So for me, understanding that art can be a safe environment for conversation, controversy, myth-making, challenging all that, it was something that I understood from the great people who founded the Abbey Theatre.
That's amazing. Shaza, can you tell us about how you try to use the arts to connect these minority communities in Singapore, and how do you go about that?
Maybe I can share with you how I started in the theater in order to answer that question. The company has been around for 35 years, and I got involved when I was 17 years old, 17 years ago. Back then, when I was a performer, I wanted to perform. Realized very quickly I was terrible at it, but I really liked controlling things, so I got into producing and management. But what I wanted to share was the first time I watched a play by this company, I remember sitting in the theater space, looking around me and feeling and crying and thinking with people who felt the same way as I do about issues that we were facing in Singapore as ethnic minorities. A conversation that doesn't quite happen outside of these sort of spaces. And I feel like if it was only that I can achieve successfully as the artistic director of the company, where people feel like they are allowed to feel, allowed to think, allowed to talk about these conversations that are deemed as maybe difficult in Singapore, I think I've already done what I wanted to do. But to go further to that would be to include people who are beyond ethnic minorities into the space, because that's when paradigm shifts can happen, that's when we can effect social change.
So how do you do that? How do you?
So how we do that is through having those difficult discourse that is not happening outside, putting it on stage. That's how we do it. We talk about socio-political issues through the ethnic minority perspective. We talk about global and local issues, as you mentioned earlier.
And you have an audience, so do people show?
Yeah. But I think the slight issue that we sometimes face is that there is a bit of an echo chamber. So people who already feel the way we do come to watch our shows, and then we feel like, okay, something's changing. But I think a bit of a challenge, but I think we are successfully, including more and more people, is by convincing people that the ethnic minority perspective has to be in the national narrative. It has to be in the international narrative as well. Yeah.
Jane, your work in Philadelphia is the essence of community. How do you use the mural arts to connect the diverse people of your city, and especially the young people who you weave together from different social economic backgrounds?
Well, first, I just want to say thank you for having me here. Thank you, and I love Eisenhower. So I'll go really fast. So back in the day, I worked for this anti-graffiti network, and it was like just a very grassroots organization. And we didn't really have much. We had like beige paint, big brushes, tons of graffiti writers. Never did murals, and I'm like, we should do murals. And they're like, okay. Like the former mayor was like, all right. But so we started doing murals, and what happened was something that stunned me. Because first people were like, we don't want art. We want housing, we want jobs, we're just not interested. We were like, well, what do you want? And then people were like, well, actually, no one ever asked us what we want. Things are either not done or done to us. And the only visual stimulation we have here are billboards advertising alcohol and tobacco. And we were like, well, that can change. What do you want? And people started talking about memory, history, family, like whatever, struggles, triumphs. And then suddenly, their stories went up on walls. And it was like, it's sort of strange to say today, but back then, it was like revolutionary because it wasn't happening. And also people said, like, if we go to museums, we don't see anything that looks like us. Suddenly, on 3-story walls here around this neighborhood, that's our story. And that has real power. So it was like a paradigm shift, what you're talking about, right? Because this wasn't art that came down from the sky, landed from Mars. It was art that was created in careful, deliberate, respectful collaboration with people. And all these graffiti writers that I was working with who were like, no, we don't want to use a brush, because we couldn't use spray paint. So I was like, look, you learn how to use a brush. It's like good, you can make money. You can do something artists all over America want, get paid to paint. And they were like, all right, fine. And then they started doing it, and it was like super exciting. And so they became engaged, and the neighborhoods became engaged. And then people were like, well, wait a minute, we were part of this mural. This vacant lot, we want to change. We want city services. And we're like, oh, we're part of the city. We can help. And suddenly we go to all these different commissioners, streets department, L&I, and we go like, this neighborhood needs help. And my former boss was always like, the commissioner of streets said a group of artists is calling about the pothole. Is that you? And I'm like, guilty as charged. That's us. But we were like, here we were on the front lines doing all this work. So we were like, oh, art has power. We sort of learned that. And then Then suddenly, anti-graffiti, my former boss, he passed away. I was going to go to law school. My brother's a lawyer. Thankfully, he took me out of it. I went to see another mayor. I said, would you create a community-based public art program? He said, yes. So then he's like, come up with a name. We're like, Mural Arts. He goes, Jane Gold, you're in charge. I'm like, because I'd never been in charge of anything. So it's like, and our budget was like $100,000. But it's like, we're a pro-art program. So we started like working with kids all over the city and neighborhoods. And then the big breakthrough was when we were made part of the Division of Social Services. And in city government, if you really want to move the needle, you have to have like authority, creativity, and a budget. And the head of social services had those things. Estelle Richmond, she's remarkable. And she said, I believe all the big departments should have art involved with them. And I was like, music to my ears. So we started working with kids, you know, in family court, people coming home from prison, the behavioral health system, and our circle just grew and grew. And we started to tell like people's narratives in a much broader way. So it was sort of like art as a city service, but art as a tool of social change. And more importantly, suddenly there was this vast array of authors throughout the city that were involved. And I posit that muralism in our city has been so resilient, because we've made it through 5 mayors and we hope 6, is because of the wide range of authors that are involved, that everyone matters, everyone has a story to tell, and those stories play out on the walls throughout the city of Philadelphia. People say it's like the autobiography of our city. We have now over 4,300 works of art, and I think the work is beautiful, but it's actually the stories behind the work and the process that goes on that is extraordinarily profound.
That's amazing. I want to jump back to Fiach. I want to. There's one thing I know that you're going to ask Jane later, but I'm not going to break that. But you wanted to just circle back closer to home in Ireland for you for a moment. Tell us more about your work that you use. You use the arts to build the bridges between the different groups of Northern Ireland and Ireland.
Yeah, I mean, the arts are, I suppose, a safe space and a challenging space for all kinds, as I said before, all kinds of both myth-making and challenging myths and challenging stereotypes. And I continue to that post the Abbey, and well, I'll circle around a little bit, and I'll say, you know, for people here, fellows, I tell you, there's a time bomb that hits you as a member of the Eisenhower group, the EF family. And sometimes it ticks off pretty quickly in your career, and sometimes it takes another, like time release, it takes 20 years, and sometimes both. And for me, it was like several time release bombs. One of them is coming up next year, and really it happened, and I said it briefly to Jane, but I remember the Mural tour and walk you gave in 2004 when I was here on the multi-nation program. And I went, yeah, okay, I don't know how I will do anything with this, and I didn't, until next year, right? And I'm involved with an amazing organization called the Digital Hub. And I moved from theater into tech, right? I knew nothing about tech at all, but I knew about entrepreneurship, I knew about community. And in fact, actually, it's interesting because the tech, I am on a bit of a tangent here, but stay with me for a second. But the tech community used kind of words that are very familiar in the arts world: ecosystem, community, innovation, risk, experiment, collaboration, team. These are all words that were appropriated by and welcomed to it by a community, the tech community, but words that we use all the time in theater: risk-taking, mistakes, you know, fail better, as another Nobel Prize winner, Samuel Beckett, said. I have one more to go. I'll get him in there somewhere. And I suppose I realized when I became involved with this amazing urban regeneration program in Dublin 8 and the Liberties, that art and culture was going to be an elemental part of that, and I didn't know how. And one of the ways that I realized, because we have a lot of buildings that we are about to regenerate and over the next 5 to 10 years, I realized that the one thing that actually would connect the local community, which is extremely disenfranchised, community that is transgenerational poverty, lack of education, but is mural arts, right? So, Jane, it's your fault, and it's Eisenhower's fault, and George, it's your fault, but essentially a time-release bomb has exploded in this year, and I'll be talking to Jane about advice about how we will work on our vacant lots and our vacant sites and our buildings. And to answer your question, because this is typical, ask an Irish person a question, is that if you could find a Trojan horse, if you could find a mechanism by which communities can engage and communities can work through, and Jane has eloquently described that here today. It is a very valuable kind of vessel, a very valuable medium to use, and street art, or graffiti art, or mural art, and again, I'd be interested, Jane, in your definitions of that. I'm not sure if there are any, but it's the process that you're talking about, Jane, that's most important. So when you said it's the stories behind the mural, the process is just as valuable, really, as the finished art.
Absolutely, absolutely. I want to go next I'm going back to Singapore.
Yeah.
I wanted to ask you, from what I understand, film, theater, and arts in general in Singapore have been very instrumental in opening the space for freedom of expression. Can you talk to us about that? Do you agree with that? Is that accurate?
I don't know if I agree, but I think that because of how much red tape there is around creating art, we've become a lot more creative. So sort of,
okay.
You know, I don't know if you know, but like Singapore ranks 160 out of 180 countries in the world in terms of its press freedom index. And so you can imagine how art is also censored in Singapore, be it theater, film, music. And in theater, what we use a lot of is satire. So satire becomes a huge way of creating theater, talking about issues that are prevalent in Singapore, talking about issues that are that mean a lot to us, but in a way that still creates a safe space for people who are involved, people like ourselves, people who are involved, as well as the audience members. So I think we play a lot with that, and you talk about honesty, putting things on stage that is honest and truthful, and I do agree with that, but I think we play with that around. We play around with that quite a bit in order to get away with having that conversation on stage. Yeah, so 50-50 around that, yeah.
Do you feel since you threw out that stat, self-expression, you know, art is all about being genuine and being true to yourself and being true to reflecting of what you see.
Yep.
So do you feel, is it a challenge for some of your work or expression, or at least do you feel?
I do think it's a challenge. I think it's one of the biggest things that we deal with as a company that primarily talks about the difficult parts of being Singaporean, being an ethnic minority Singaporean. But I think it's part of what makes it exciting as well. I don't see it as a challenge I don't see it as an obstacle. I see it as a challenge. And I see challenges as a way of creating art that is more meaningful. Like we talked about the paradigm shift. It has to be difficult. Art has to sometimes at least be difficult in order for it to effect change. And I think that gives me a lot of purpose in life. I think it has given the company purpose for the last 35 years. And I do see change. I do see people taking more, especially post-COVID, you know, everyone was at home, everyone was so involved in the politics in Singapore, not realizing that there was such a thing as racism in Singapore as well. People were very involved in the conversations in the US. And not realizing that racism or things that are parallels in Singapore, but in different ways and in different strengths, right? But now people,
that's why you need the arts
exactly,
to educate you.
Yeah, and I think now that that conversation is a lot more at the forefront. You see the change in the people who are coming. Maybe 10 or 13 years ago, when I first started in the company in a managerial position, a lot of the people who were coming to watch our shows are primarily ethnic minorities. Maybe 90% were ethnic minorities. And now, in the last maybe 5 years or so, our audience members would be 50% ethnic minorities and 50% from the majority. And
That's
really
amazing.
exciting.
Is it just because you've been doing it for so long, or what do you feel like the paradigm shift?
I feel like people, maybe because of social media, people are more involved in that conversation. People realize that we cannot continue pretending that it doesn't exist. And because art provides a safe space to have that conversation, I think that's they're in. And I think that's our in having that conversation as well.
Jane, we want to come back to you for a second, and everybody wants to know what the secret sauce is for you, right? In terms of what do you need exactly to help make your vision become a reality? What are your major ingredients?
Well, I want to say that with both of what you're saying, there is this magic to art. It's sometimes the space between the words. It's sort of nuance, right? But it has a particular power that draws people in, that connects people, that heals, that's meditative, but also there's something called art util that also is very practical. So I think you can be aspirational and pragmatic at the same time. And so what we need, I would say, we need to keep going. Is that the question exactly? Sort of.
Well, it's just like, what do you need? What do you need to succeed? What are their ingredients for success?
So the ingredients for success are for more widespread belief about how important this is, that there is a tendency in our society to sort of marginalize the arts. It goes over there, and I can even hear it in our city where we have tons of wonderful cultural organizations, and Mural Arts has been around forever, but it's like, we have to deal with public safety and public health and schools, so it's sort of like the next sentence is, so why can we deal with art? When I was on a panel in front of City Council talking about restoration of public art, they were like, Ms. Golden, that sounds interesting, but we have a school district that's in crisis. And I'm like, you know what? We always talk about aspiring to be a global city. Let's multitask. And more importantly, what I want is for people to understand that when we talk about the criminal legal system or behavioral health issues or education or community development, it's not like the arts are other, right? The arts should be integrated in how we think about all of them, because I have witnessed this firsthand, how the needle has been moved in unexpected and wonderful ways. Just like when you said, more people are coming to the theater. You saw people change and shift. That's right. So widespread belief, and then funders, right? So who are the funders who really believe in this? For the longest time, we worked in a state prison, county jail, and no one would support that. People would say, well, we support policy work. Well, guess what? If we're not working on the ground, what difference does it make about all the policies we have? So it's sort of like, what I'd really like is for people to open up their imagination and think about how art is like a window, and the window is open, and through that window is hope and possibility that is endless.
That's beautiful. I want to come back to you for a second, because you have such an interesting trajectory, art, then as a senator, technology. I mean, those are three different types of careers that you usually don't meld together.
I keep running.
Yeah. But I wanted to ask you, what are some of the concrete ways the arts have worked to lessen political and social divisions and advance social cohesion, since you have such a unique background on that?
Well, I'm sure Jane and Shaza would agree. The arts isn't the panacea. It's not going to cure all the social and political ills, but I think Jane is absolutely right. It needs to be a central part of any healthy democracy. It needs to be able to question and challenge. Something extraordinary happened during COVID. I was a founding member of the National Campaign for the Arts. Now, I wasn't involved during COVID because I have a different role now. But during COVID and during the lockdown, when there was an extraordinary kind of sense of, ironically, it's not a community in Ireland, right? People came together, people understood that doing shopping for their neighbours or their community, or spending time with each other, relearning the idea of just talking to each other. And what the arts did was they realized themselves that they could access through Zooms, through MS Teams, through whatever, they could access an articulation, a manifestation, a kind of creation of new stories, different stories, told differently, obviously, because it's all through technology. But it helped keep a community together. And what I mean by that is it helped the community, us, Irish people, understand that, you know, living, surviving had another element to it, which was the sustenance of the intellect, the brain fodder, the imagination, reassuring, and, you know, Heaney's poetry, I mean, it became a kind of a cliche, but Seamus Heaney's poetry, and the wonderful poem he wrote called Wintering Out. I'm looking at Joyce O'Connor here, I can't remember the full poem, but he was quoted several times as a way of, it's okay, like, this will pass. Mm-hmm. Winter will pass into spring. And poetry and art became a very important part for Irish people and the Irish community, to the point where clearly the Irish government understood that and doubled the funding for the arts. Doubled the funding for the arts. Now, it was on its way anyway, but there has been an extraordinary transformation, Carrie, in Ireland, where to go to Jane's point, is that the Irish government and the Irish state, and we have a president who is a poet, right? Extraordinary, and a philosopher. They understood because of advocacy. Now, it wasn't just because they just dreamt it up, but there was advocacy, there was activism, we were all pushing for it, and they doubled the arts funding directly from the state, from the taxpayer, because they understood the power of art. Why? Because they understood for a community to thrive, to sustain itself, to create resilience, and to reinvigorate itself, art as well as food, water, and education are a very, very important part of a community.
That's amazing. That's very interesting. And that, you know, it's funny with the arts. It's like when you said funding. That's just like the ding, ding, ding. I mean, how do you get your funding for your theater? Is it all through ticket sales, or?
We do get government funding, and one of the conversations, actually something that I was working on as part of my Eisenhower Fellows project, was around arts philanthropy and how there is a huge lack of arts philanthropy in ethnic minority communities. And I wonder whether it's because of access. I was wondering whether it was because of access. Are they not getting it, or having access to it, or is it that there are more pertinent issues that ethnic minorities all over the world are facing that feel more obviously more urgent than the arts? And I think the other conversation is around fundraising in ethnic minority companies, talking about capacity. So that's a huge thing that I am very interested in, because I think fundraising is such a core way of companies to continue existing and to continue making work that nobody can tell them how to make.
Well,
you know, yeah.
The censorship issues are
exactly. Yeah.
It's funny, in the United States, the conversation for the arts, it used to always be we were like the worst supporters, and Europe or other places were much something that we would, as artists, that you look for because you're actually supported. Jane, how do you feel in the United States, where arts is probably the least funded organization? How do you make the budget gaps?
Well, I'm sort of baffled by it, actually. I find it like in our city, we have a very small office of arts and culture, and it's precarious. It could go away anytime. There's not a charter change, it's not a department, and so it has gone away. And then it's like, how did it go away? So I feel that we talked about this, there was a big meeting the other night at a museum in Philly, and it was like, I feel like we're always in a precarious state and sort of on the edge of the cliff. And it can go over, and Mural Arts, I have to say, and I feel very grateful for this, we're probably luckier because we have some city money, right? So 35% of our budget comes from the city, and that goes from way back in the day when we were part of a city department, and it just stayed with us, and we leverage it and stretch it and try to, like, you know, make every dollar count. However, it is really, it's surprising, because if you look at Philadelphia and you think of the many, and there's so many great arts organizations and artists, and all these artists are moving from New York to Philly for affordable space, but they're not going to stay if we don't do more for them, right? So it's like, how do we challenge ourselves to think about the investment? Like someone said to me, and actually they said it at an event, they said, you know, we talk a lot in Philadelphia about like the Phillies and the Eagles, and they're great, and they're winning, and that's fantastic, right? But he said,
that's sports.
We're winning sort of it's like the world championship of public art all the time because we have so much, but we don't think about that. Or we have this organization called the Greater Philadelphia Cultural Alliance who has all this data on the huge, it's like $81 million generated by the arts ecosystem in Philly. And that's just one city, in a state, in a country. And if you just kept multiplying it out, it's probably giant. And yet, I think the philanthropic structure that supports the arts, it's not equal. And I think too about city funding. Who are the cities who've been really interesting, who've thought about non-traditional ways and traditional ways to support the arts? So I'm always trying to figure out like what is the secret sauce that would help support our sector. I'm like a multitasker. I think about mural arts, but I also think about that cultural sector all the time.
Well, and it's hard because you need the funding, you need the support, you need the infrastructure to do what you need to do and to create the safe space, because it's really hard to create a safe space when you don't feel safe within your own walls.
That's right. And also I want to say risk capital, right? So you want to be able to give artists grants so they can test out their vision, because artists make our world a better place. There's no doubt about it. They're like agents of change and transformation. We hire hundreds of artists every year. We pay them well, and I think that's super important. But honestly, I wish it wasn't 225. I wish it was 500 or 600, because the talent and the interest is out there.
So now let me just throw this out for the whole panel, and whoever wants to answer this first, go right ahead. But I would like to know, what are some of the most successful examples that you've seen outside of your own work where the arts have served to connect communities riveted by political, economical, or social tensions? The best example.
Well, I mean, as an outsider looking into the US, and there was this discussions this morning on about race, about identity, about community, and having had my experience with Eisenhower 2004, I think one of the most radical, amazing, you'd be surprised when I say this, but the most radical, amazing piece of art to come out of the US in a way that has got us to reread the US and celebrate the US, and it was a radical piece. It broke the mold. It was the most experimental piece. It was Hamilton. Hamilton was an epochal moment for what we all understood or tried to understand or explain the provenance of the US, the misunderstandings of the US, race, the structure of the musical. The great American art form is the musical. I mean, nobody does it better than you guys, right? Nobody, really, nobody. And yet Hamilton broke that mold, rewrote the rules, gave it back to not only American audience, but the beauty about art, the beauty about culture is it just can translate into other cultures. And I watched that on Disney Plus in my COVID bedroom, and it was just mesmerizing. I mean, the artwork, how it was presented online was also genius in terms of, so that's mainstream, but it wasn't mainstream thanks to the public theater, thanks to Oscar Eustis, thanks to all the work that they did. It worked, chopped its way, but to me, to answer your question, it was one of the most radical pieces of art. It's now mainstreamed, right? But it wasn't, and it wasn't intended, and I thought,
Well, it's funny, George and I saw, we saw Hamilton, but we saw that director when he did his first show, and it was amazing because he put hip hop. It was absolutely revolutionary because it was brown and black people seeing their culture for the first time on a stage, on Broadway stage. It was amazing.
But it also started a mainstream discussion around identity. Do you need to be white and Irish to play a white and Irish character? Like, what about colourblindness? What about... It opened a very, very rich debate that I think has helped transform or create a richer dialogue around representation on stage in particular. And I thought that was... I thanked America for introducing Hamilton as a point of discussion and as a great piece of art.
Do you have one?
Could I just echo a little bit on that? Like, besides Hamilton, I just think, like, when you watch shows that, whether it's film, theater, TV series that are talking about race and religion, Islamophobia, anti-Semitism, and it's so daring, and from like when you watch it, you realize, oh my God, can you imagine if you could have that conversation in real life?
Yeah.
Right.
You know, so that just really excites me. That sort of things to me is just things that it starts embedding things in you, and then change happens from there.
Because I remember I went to Romania pre-1989 by Ceausescu because great theatre was coming out of there, and I remember seeing extraordinary works by Jan Karamitru, who really was a great revolutionary, and I saw him play Hamlet, right? And I saw him communicating to an audience in Ceausescu's time, communicating, and everybody in the auditorium understood what Hamlet was about. Everyone understood what Jan Karamitru was saying. Everybody except Ceausescu, who was so stupid and ignorant, actually. But in the end, it itself, what did it do? Did it transform? No, but it kept the community together. They understood that there could be hope, and art can also provide that hope as well. Sorry for cutting across.
So I always want to say, when I was on the Eisenhower Fellowship, and I went to Northern Ireland and in Dublin, I made a visit to Mountjoy Prison. Oh, yeah. And I remember the warden, we call them superintendents in the United States, the head of the prison, was like, he said, well, he was very proud of the theater program. And I remember, because we had just started working in the prison, in the state prison, and I was really surprised. I was surprised at his exuberance. I was surprised how polite everybody was when people offered me tea. And I was like, oh, I'm in a prison. They said, good afternoon, would you like a cup of tea? I'm like, oh my God, this is unbelievable. Like, not like the United States. So, but then there was this, he said, my bottom line responsibility is to make sure the people who are here never come back, that they get out, and that's it. And then he said, he talked just about this theater program, and he invited me to come back to the opening night. And the opening night, it wasn't just prisoners who were in the audience, they opened it up to everybody, and people everywhere were super excited about this play. And I thought, well, this is so interesting, because art is transformative. But then you think about how it can be systems change, and it changes something because stigma is lifted. And that's one of the beautiful things that art does. It's like captivating, right? Because people in the audience saw people on stage who were actors, not prisoners. And I'm sure the people who were in the prison felt that, people in the audience felt it, and I came away from that moment thinking like our responsibility when we work in places like the county jail or the detention centers or in the state prison, like what's our responsibility for real? Like this is, if we look at our work as really a moral imperative, which we do, then we need to do everything we can to offer programs, but also to understand that people see people who are behind walls as nameless, faceless, and the enemy. And that we have the power, artists, culture makers, to do something about that. And so I will say that that was pivotal. And from that moment on, we started to turn this program at the state prison into what people refer to as like a think tank, where we brought in policy people and mayors, and we had this 3-year program with crime victims and the men in the class at Graterford. And since then, they have literally created 60 outdoor murals for neighborhoods throughout Philadelphia. And it's been life-changing for them, and certainly has shifted the stigma with people across the city. So I credit that moment.
I think we have about like 10 minutes left, so it was like I wanted to open it up if anybody had any questions. Otherwise, I can keep going. But okay. Oh, here's a mic coming your way.
So, a couple things. First, when you're advocating for especially funding for the arts, and you're advocating to a city or state, what are the ways that you make the benefits of the arts tangible and put it in their language? Are there metrics that you use? I mean, how are you really translating what is a very intangible benefit into something very concrete? And then the other question is, in light of, you know, Secretary Gates invoked the need for more non-military mechanisms by which we can be imparting our values, but it was really grounded in a time in which cultural leaders had a different sort of sway socially, especially in light of social media and how things are changing. And so I'm wondering if there's a sort of limit, especially in the United States, to how much strategy, cultural strategy, can really be cohesively put together if we continue to lack a cabinet level representation for the arts.
Good question.
Those are good questions.
So I'll talk about the first question. So when we advocate for the arts, because we have to testify for our budget in front of City Council every year, so we talk about, we're looking in our criminal justice work, the recidivism rate. So ours is about 6 to 10%. The national average is 65%. So as a nation, we're failing. People come out and they go back. So we're looking at that, and then 2 years out, are people, do they have a job? Are they keeping a job? In art education, graduation rates, retention, you know, where kids are going afterwards. I mean, it's sort of like trying to measure their connection to what they've gone through at Mural Arts and how long they stay. In our behavioral health work, we have a same-day work program for people who are facing housing insecurity, so we're looking at how long people stay with the program. But we have a study from the Yale School of Medicine, any of you could go to the website, and they followed our Porch Light program, that's our partnership with the Department of Behavioral Health, for 4 years, and they measured individual impact, but something called, they said, collective efficacy, and that people in communities feel ready for other things as a result of the work with us. So we try to draw on whatever evaluations or data that we have to make a case, but part of me feels like we'll do that, but it's also the intangibles that also matter, so we try to talk about both. But we do put the data up front, like how many people we hire. Like it's, you know, we have like thousands of people that are at work, and that really matters. And so we're sort of looking all the time at the best case making that we can possibly make.
Yeah, I don't think there would be any specific wording that you could say that would be like the right way, but I think it's really about the passion and the vision of the project, and where, because if you have a great project, you have a great story, it finds an audience, you find a way.
That's well said.
Yeah, and it takes time, right? This is, you know, there is a trap in developing KPIs, and you know, because it becomes, you know, it's that argument between instrumentalism and intrinsic value of the arts, and it's a tricky one. And I think I played both cards in my life, and the kind of instrumental one does blow up in your face, because if you say, yeah, art's good for your health, and but if you're dealing with an aesthetic argument, then it backfires. If you're working with artists in the healthcare system, it's different, and that's very, very valuable and very important and has integrity. And so if you're arguing for arts in the health system or in prisons, all extremely important and valid, but it's different to other art forms in other contexts. So you just have to tell your story constantly and forever. And I think the next day, the Irish government saw that, but that took, being on shoulders of other people, that took about 25 years. Lip service, yeah, and we're great at the arts, whatever, to the point now where we got, you know, 2 Irish authors on the shortlist of the Booker Prize for this year, 2 out of 5. And that's amazing, but that is to do with, you know, significant investment over 20, 30 years. Yeah.
There's one other thing I just want to say, that it's like you have to also create an appetite for the arts, so it's our responsibility to be highly strategic and to have allies in government and to keep making the case, because when there's 17 people on City Council in Philly, when I testify for the budget, and I don't ever take this for granted, all 17 people are going, yay, Mural Arts. Why are they doing that? Because their constituents want our work. So we have a waiting list of like over 1,000 people that want murals, so there's an appetite for art in the city, but we worked on that for a really long period of time.
And, okay, go ahead. Next question.
Thank you. So just building on what you said, because what you said is very interesting, how you can create appetite for your art, because it's very interesting to see how you can create art or cultural funding that is independent from governments or from philanthropy, etc. Now we can create art and culture projects that are self-sustained, where people are willing to pay for it and are willing to fund it against sort of a commercial exchange. And that, in my opinion, is the best way to make sure that the art is independent, make sure that the art is sustainable, and that is scalable. So, in your opinion, how can you work on that to move the sort of the art from that philanthropy, government-funded space into
You
a
mean
more
into private?
commercialized space. Yeah.
Wow. Who was?
I don't know, I feel like a mix of it is where I want to be. I don't want to complete, I think in terms of maybe stability, a mix of it is really important for me, not just for it to go private. I think philanthropy is actually really, really important because I think it's the way the society shows you that the arts is really important through money, you know. And with the government, I think, government funding at least, I think it is also about making sure that they know. Singapore's I feel quite lucky because unlike in the US, there is government funding that is relatively stable in the arts if you're part of the major companies, which we are. There are only like maybe 52 major companies. And I feel like that is a relationship that I want to continue having because I want the government to continue understanding that it is very important that they are part of that conversation as well. So yeah, I mean, that's my take on it.
But there is something, I mean, you bring up the point. It's like if you are getting $10 million for a project, someone who's giving you $10 million wants to have some sort of voice. So it's like, how do you sort of dance between that? And I think that's where, if you're finding private funders, especially in the film industry, you know, it's a little nutso, and or television too. It's, you know, you never know what works, but being independent and being able to keep the funding side separate from the words or the expression that you're doing, keeping them separate is very important, but it's very difficult. And you just have to be very vigilant, I guess, on who you partner with. Next question.
Lady here.
Lady.
Well, you're
Got it all worked out.
Thank you.
Yes.
Related to this, I would like to say that, as our great panelists mentioned, art can influence people, art can bring people together and empower people and give voices to people who don't always have voices. But art can be also be influenced and be diluted and misused, and that's how we get propaganda. And of course, government and other forces are into that. So my question is, where do we draw the line, and what separates good and relevant art from propaganda?
Wow! Wow!
Thank you.
You see it. I mean, have you an example? Can you tell me what's? Yeah. All right. Yeah. Thank you. I can't add to that. I can't add to that.
No, but I mean, but I understand what you're asking, and it's a very difficult question to answer because I immediately think of deep fakes in the film industry. I mean, now I can't trust half of what comes out because you want to make sure that that's actually what somebody said and it wasn't. Now the technology is so amazing that you can put 8 different times when someone spoke in a different way and put it together seamlessly and it looks like one conversation.
Yeah.
So how do you trust that? I mean, that's a larger, broader issue, which is with the arts. I mean,
some people do use the arts to make connections. Okay, so we spoke about that. And you know, so there's a couple of layers, like good art, you know, why and how it's done and who's it for is one argument. But then often arts is used to connect people. I don't think that's a bad thing if it's obvious. So the Americans in the 1940s and 50s sent jazz to Europe, right? I think that was an amazing thing to do. They sent expressionistic art to Europe. Now, they used the arts in the way that Secretary Gates this morning spoke about non-military intervention. And I think it was extremely smart, and they set a standard. Now, some of the arts resist that, but a lot of the arts, and Ireland learned from that. So we often try, because we've a small economic power, we don't have much clout, we use the arts, whether it's river dance or whatever, to promote ourselves or to promote trade. And the artists that do this for us also get paid. So it is a complicated, I mean, you're very right, it's a complicated relationship, but if it's clear and open, and everybody knows about it, then it's not propaganda as much as promotion. And that's a different thing to what you're saying.
And also, audiences have to be able to be smarter and notice the difference. You have to be able to note the change, and that's also because it's a two-way street. Let's go to the next question. Oh,
she was.
No. Hey, one more. All right, one more. Yeah. Democracy. No.
We can't get between husband and wife here.
Thank you all so much. My name is Vanessa Cooksey, and I have the pleasure of being a 2016 USA Fellow, live in St. Louis, and run the Regional Arts Commission in St. Louis. And I just wanted to share for those who are looking for language and resources and data. Americans for the Arts released their 2022 study yesterday, and our industry generated $151 billion in economic activity. So check out AFTA. Yes. Now my question for the panel and anyone who's able to answer, when we look at art from a commercial perspective, if you'll put your futurist hat on or your analyst hat, do you see more artists moving into commercialization? Like Taylor Swift's tour is expected to generate $5 billion. So in some instances, the notion of starving artists doesn't always have to be. And what are some of the pathways that leaders can look to help artists really grow financially?
I think that's a great question, and I think we sort of see that as a responsibility. Like, we have an internship program, an apprenticeship program, and 4 years ago we started a fellowship program for Black and Brown artists. And part of all those groups of artists, our responsibility is to create networks, to build capacity, to connect them to professionals in the arts. So it isn't just about painting. And some of them have incredible design skills, or they're interested in web-based work or digital work. And so how do we consistently try to create pathways for people? I think that is the most important thing that we can do. And I think it's true for our young people as well. We've got 2,000 kids in our art ed program. We just are starting this really serious entrepreneurial program, because again, it's like, at the end of the day, if you want to work in your studio and that's what if you can do it, I mean, it's a tough road, that's your choice. But we want people to be really informed as they make those choices. And so I think that's a brilliant question, because now in today's world there are different options, and it's sort of like, and you can be a creative being and also choose another path other than working in your studio, or that path and working in your studio. I know lots of artists who work with Mural Arts part of the time and have other jobs, or like they consider themselves entrepreneurs.
And the only thing I would say about film and television is that in terms of the crazy money that, like the Barbies or those big movies, $100 million movies, the studios are gonna keep making those. Then they're gonna make the independents will always be there, because that's just an amazing community in itself. But that middle range where it was like $20 to $50 million, every studio exec has told me that they're gonna go all over the world because it's cheaper than the United States, than filming in the United States, because of the unions. So it's a really strange time, in the arts. But I think, unfortunately, unless you guys want to add anything else, I think we have to wrap it up.
Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you.